Have you ever noticed how every time a new, incredibly powerful tool drops into society, the immediate collective reaction isn't curiosity. It's just absolute panic.
Oh, complete panic,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, think about the timeline of human innovation for a second. When the printing press arrived, there was genuine terror that mass-produced books would somehow destroy the intellectual authority of the church, and just ruin the minds of the public.
And we saw the exact same thing with the camera.
Exactly. People thought it was the literal death of visual art
Yeah.
and the dawn of recorded music. Live musicians thought it was this apocalyptic event that would completely end music as a communal experience.
It's a historical cycle.
It really is. The initial cultural response to these massive leaps forward is almost always a profound sense of threat. We look at the new paradigm and immediately assume the sky is falling. So today, we are bringing you a deep dive into a really fascinating essay by a contemporary tech philosopher.
And this text makes a compelling argument.
It does. It argues that artificial intelligence sits squarely inside this exact historical pattern of threat perception. So our mission today is to unpack this source material for you, which breaks down the current AI backlash into 8 distinct psychological and practical layers.
Layer by layer.
Right. We are going to separate the actual grounded problems from the highly symbolic kind of existential fears that we inevitably attach to any disruptive technology.
And it really is a necessary framework, especially right now. Because if we look at the bigger picture, new tools never just change how we execute a task.
No, they do so much more than that.
They fundamentally disturb existing social hierarchies. That's the core of it. Whenever a disruptive tool enters the cultural bloodstream, it changes who is allowed to create. It shifts who controls the distribution of knowledge.
Who gets to be the gatekeeper?
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly, it disrupts who has the authority to define what counts as authentic or real. So when people express anxiety about generative AI, they usually aren't just reacting to a neural network or, lines of Python code.
Right. They're reacting to a sudden, violent shift in cultural power and structure,
That's exactly it.
which makes it incredibly difficult to figure out what people are actually afraid of amidst all the yelling on the internet. So let's start where the essay starts separating the real from the symbolic. This covers the first 2 layers of the author's framework.
The grounded reality versus the psychological projection.
Right. And the first layer acknowledges that not all fear is psychological. There are legitimate, fact-based constraints and consequences to this technology. We have to start there.
Absolutely. The author is very careful not to paint this transition as some utopian, frictionless event. There are grounded realities we have to navigate.
Like the physical infrastructure.
Yes, training and running large language models or image generators requires massive data centers. And those in turn consume staggering amounts of electricity and water for cooling. That is a hard physical constraint on the power grid.
It's not just an abstract concept, it's real resources.
Right. And then you have the output side of the equation. Systems like Midjourney or deepfake voice generators absolutely can be weaponized.
To create misinformation.
Misinformation, impersonating public figures, destabilizing trust in media. And economically, there is no denying that certain administrative, coding, and commercial art jobs are going to face severe disruption. These are factual issues that require regulation and adaptation. It's the reality of the tool.
But, and this is a big but, the essay points out that we have navigated these kinds of structural disruptions before, and we usually do it by redefining the industry rather than losing it entirely.
The photography example in the text is perfect for this.
I love that specific analogy. Think about the invention of photography. Before the camera, if you wanted your likeness captured for posterity, you hired a portrait painter. The painter was effectively a human photocopier.
A very skilled, very slow photocopy.
Exactly. So when the daguerreotype came along, it genuinely threatened that specific economic model. But portrait painters didn't go extinct.
No, they didn't. In fact, the arrival of the camera actually liberated painters from the burden of mechanical capture.
Because they didn't have to just document reality anymore.
Right. Because they no longer had to perfectly replicate reality, they were pushed to explore what else paint could do. That technological pressure is what gave us Impressionism, Expressionism, modern abstract art.
The camera took over the documentation, forcing the painter to find new ways to express subjective human experience.
And the essay argues that AI is highly likely to follow a similar trajectory. It is an evolution of human creativity, forcing us to ask what the human mind can do that the algorithm cannot.
Okay, I want to push back on that a little bit, though, or at least play devil's advocate for a second, which brings us to the second layer, the symbolic fears, because here's where it gets really interesting.
The AI art isn't real art debate.
Yes, I see this argument constantly in creative circles, and the pushback is usually exactly what you just said. Well, they said the same thing about photography. But sitting in a dark room, developing film, or even learning the intricacies of a DSLR camera still requires an enormous amount of physical interaction.
It requires specialized knowledge and manual skill.
Right. So does the essay address the sheer gap between mastering a camera and just typing a 10-word prompt into a text box?
It does. And this is where the psychological analysis gets really fascinating. The essay frames this debate around the concept of visible labor.
Visible labor. Okay, explain that.
For centuries, our definition of artistic legitimacy has been deeply entwined with the physical evidence of struggle and time. When we look at a classic oil painting, we are not just looking at the image.
We're looking at the effort.
Exactly. We are subconsciously calculating the thousands of hours that artists spent practicing anatomy, mastering brushstrokes, learning color theory. We equate that visible manual labor with the object's inherent value.
So when a generative tool fundamentally alters how labor appears,
When it essentially makes the mechanical execution invisible.
people interpret that as an erasure of the effort itself. They feel that removing the physical struggle invalidates the final destination.
You nailed it.
So the anger isn't necessarily about the aesthetic quality of the output. It's about the feeling that someone is bypassing the initiation ritual. The idea that you haven't earned the right to call yourself a creator if you didn't suffer through the technical execution.
Yes, that's the symbolic fear. But historically, art has never been defined exclusively by the sheer caloric output of physical labor.
Right.
It is ultimately defined by intention, communication, and emotional resonance. Think about when digital illustration first arrived, when artists stopped using wet paint and started using styluses on tablets.
There's a massive outcry.
A huge outcry. People said pixels weren't real art because the software allows you to hit undo. But digital art is now fully accepted. Film editing uses highly automated software to handle the technical splicing of a timeline, but the editor's choices are what make it art.
So the essay makes the case that AI simply introduces another layer of mediation between a human's imagination and the final form.
Exactly. The physical execution looks radically different, but the curation, the prompting, the decision of what holds meaning, that still originates from a human mind.
Okay, so if we accept that the definition of art and labor is going to stretch, we also have to look at the collateral arguments people use to push back against that stretching.
The infrastructure of fear.
Right, layers 3 and 4. This is how society weaponizes certain arguments to reject the technology wholesale. Let's look at the environmental argument again. We established that energy consumption is a real, legitimate concern.
Absolutely real.
But the author suggests that in the public discourse, the environment is often used more as a symbolic cudgel against AI than a holistic critique of tech.
Because if you look at the broader context of modern computing infrastructure, the energy demands are practically universal.
Cloud server farms, streaming high-definition video globally on Netflix or YouTube.
The massive computational power required for cryptocurrency mining. These all draw vast amounts of power from the grid. Yet, the environmental cost is frequently localized and weaponized specifically against someone generating an image or writing a script with AI.
It's selective outrage.
The essay points out that while the energy debate is incredibly necessary, it is a conversation about global energy infrastructure, renewable power grids, and how we scale technology broadly. Treating it as a uniquely AI problem is often a way to mask a deeper, more existential distaste for the tool itself.
And there's an incredibly counterintuitive point in the research here that surprised me. The assumption is that AI is just a massive net drain on resources. But the essay highlights how generative models and predictive AI can actually reduce other forms of resource consumption.
It's a really important counterpoint.
Right. If a company can rapidly prototype 100 architectural designs or simulate chemical interactions digitally using AI, it dramatically cuts down on the physical materials, the industrial waste, and the transportation required for physical trial and error.
The ecological footprint of technology is a complex ledger. It's not just a one-way street of burning coal for server farms.
Which perfectly sets up the other major systemic fear politics and power. Beyond the environment, you see critics constantly associating AI with authoritarianism, hypercapitalism, or the ultimate surveillance state.
The fear that this technology is inherently designed to centralize power and strip the individual of agency.
But the author makes a very crucial distinction here. Those anxieties are entirely valid, but they are fears about institutions, not the technology itself.
And this is where the essay uses a very grounded analogy to clarify this. A hammer.
I love the hammer analogy. Let's break that down.
A hammer is a piece of technology. You can use it to frame a house and build a shelter, or you can use it to smash a window. A camera can be used to document a profound human rights abuse and bring the truth to light.
Or it can be used by a state to produce manipulative propaganda.
Exactly. The tool itself has no ideology. It is entirely agnostic. Technology simply amplifies the intentions of the institutions or individuals who wield it.
So if a corporation uses AI to aggressively automate jobs without a safety net, that is a failure of corporate governance and labor policy.
It is not a malicious intent coded into the language model. The essay emphasizes that society wastes a lot of energy debating whether a new technology is inherently good or evil.
When really, our ethical and regulatory discussions need to focus squarely on power distribution, transparency, and accountability. We have to focus on who is swinging the hammer.
Precisely. Who controls the tool is the real political question.
I understand the logic of separating the tool from the institution. I really do. But honestly, that doesn't fully explain the temperature of the room right now.
It doesn't explain the anger.
Right. If the technology is just an agnostic amplifier, why does the backlash feel so incredibly personal? Because if you look at any forum, social media thread, or comment section discussing AI, it is rarely a calm debate about corporate governance.
It's visceral.
It is venomous. It feels like people are fighting for their lives.
And psychologically speaking, many of them feel like they are. Which brings us to layer 5, the psychological core of the essay. We have to understand the internal pressures driving this hostility.
This is the real aha moment of the piece for me.
When a disruptive technology arrives, it triggers an overwhelming fear of rapid change that an individual cannot control. But more specifically, it triggers the fear of losing cultural status.
Right. Think about what it takes to become a highly skilled illustrator or a senior software developer.
You spend a decade or more mastering a syntax, learning the exact mechanics of a very specific, highly valued trade. You build your entire identity and your economic security around the fact that your skill is scarce.
Scarcity, that really is the linchpin of the anxiety here. If your value to society or your personal sense of self-worth is entirely wrapped up in the fact that you can do something 99% of the population cannot do.
A tool that suddenly lowers the barrier to entry is terrifying.
It doesn't just feel like a shift in market dynamics. It feels like a direct personal invalidation of your life's work. If anyone can prompt a system to write a complex block of code in 5 seconds, what happens to the person who spent 15 years learning to do it the hard way?
It creates an intense psychological vertigo. I can actually relate to this on a smaller scale. I remember early in my career spending weeks manually transcribing hours of interview audio, painstakingly pausing and typing every single word.
Oh, the worst.
Now, an AI transcription tool does it flawlessly in 3 minutes. And there is this brief, irrational moment where you think, well, what was the point of all my suffering? You feel cheated.
But the essay offers a profound reevaluation of human worth here.
It does. It argues that we have mistakenly equated human value with technical exclusivity. Your worth, both as a creator and a professional, does not stem from how few people can physically execute the tasks you do.
It stems from your specific perspective, your lived experience, your conceptual depth, and your ability to interpret meaning.
The algorithm might replicate the technical execution, but it has no lived experience to draw from. It has no taste.
So, if the underlying issue is this deep identity-level panic, how are we supposed to navigate the actual day-to-day interactions about this? Because realistically, you are going to end up talking about this at a dinner party, in a Slack channel at work, or with your friends.
It's unavoidable.
And you need a way to discuss this massive cultural shift without it turning into a screaming match. The essay dives into the sociology of these interactions, focusing on boundaries. Layers 6 and 7.
Yes, and it provides a fascinating observation on how we handle other people's technological anxiety. The author notes that when society undergoes a paradigm shift, collective anxiety spikes, and people tend to project that anxiety onto anyone adopting the new tools.
And the crucial insight from the essay here is that empathy does not require emotional possession.
That is such a vital concept.
I want to pause on that because it's such a striking phrase. Empathy does not require emotional possession. What does that actually look like in practice when someone is accusing you of destroying the art world because you used ChatGPT to brainstorm ideas?
It means you can completely understand and validate why someone is terrified without absorbing their terror into your own nervous system. When someone is lashing out about AI, their distress is real, but it is ultimately information about their internal state and their fear of displacement.
It is not a mandate for you to surrender your own curiosity or abandon the tools you find useful.
Exactly. As the essay puts it, their pain exists and your knowledge exists. Acknowledging their reality doesn't mean you have to adopt their doomerism.
The author also breaks down how the most productive dialogues are framed during these cultural flashpoints. It's almost an anthropological look at de-escalation.
The rules of engagement.
Right. The first observation is that productive conversations always separate the tool from the ideology. Instead of debating whether AI is going to save or destroy humanity, grounded discussions frame it simply. AI is a utility. The ethics of it depend entirely on the policies of the people deploying it.
The second observation is the power of acknowledging legitimate friction without conceding your baseline position. If a colleague brings up the massive energy consumption or the threat of deepfakes, you don't wave it away.
You validate it.
You validate it. You agree that the energy grid needs modernization and that misinformation is a serious threat requiring regulation. By validating the grounded reality, you remove the adversarial dynamic. You aren't dismissing their reality, but you also aren't agreeing that the existence of a language model is an inherent moral failing.
And the third observation the essay makes is about ego and framing. The most toxic debates happen when the paradigm shift is framed as a zero-sum game.
Winners versus losers. Real artists versus fake prompters.
Exactly. People will always fiercely defend their identity if they feel they are being placed in the loser category of a historical shift. The essay suggests that the healthiest way to discuss this is to speak strictly from your own utility and perspective, rather than making sweeping declarations about how AI is going to render human effort obsolete.
But perhaps the most vital observation in this section is recognizing the nature of the critic.
Knowing when to walk away.
Yes. In any period of massive disruption, there are individuals who do not engage in dialogue to seek understanding. They engage purely to attack, to vent their existential dread, or to assert dominance.
The bad faith actors.
The essay points out that in these sociological shifts, not every critic is acting in good faith. If someone is determined to use you as a proxy for everything they hate about late-stage capitalism or Silicon Valley, disengagement is the most rational, healthy response. You do not owe your participation to someone who is just looking for a punching bag.
That is incredibly liberating. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to.
No, you don't.
Okay, we have covered an enormous amount of ground here today. We've separated the massive server farms from the symbolic fear of invisible labor. We've contextualized the environmental and political arguments. We've looked at the deep psychological terror of losing scarcity.
And we've analyzed how society communicates or fails to communicate during a paradigm shift.
Let's bring all of this home. The essay concludes with what it calls the deeper truth, an overarching historical perspective. Layer 8.
And that perspective is that human creativity has always, without exception, been a collaboration with tools. There is a beautiful continuum laid out in the text. Early humans used sharpened stones to shape rudimentary sculpture.
The chemistry of synthetic pigments fundamentally changed what could be achieved on a canvas.
The precise grinding of glass lenses gave us photography and cinema.
And the development of microchips and graphical processors gave us the entire realm of digital media and video games.
Every single one of these tools was initially met with resistance, and every single one became a foundational pillar of human expression.
And crucially, none of those tools ever replaced the necessity of the human mind. The mind is still the engine behind the concept. The human still determines the narrative, the composition, the intent, and the ultimate meaning of the output.
AI is undeniably a massive, unprecedented leap in capability. But according to this framework, it simply changes the interface between our imagination and the physical form.
It does not remove the imagination.
It cannot remove the imagination because algorithms do not have a need to express themselves. Humans do. The deepest, most stable position to hold right now is recognizing that technology will continually evolve and human meaning will evolve right alongside it, just as it always has.
The ethical weight of this moment doesn't lie in the neural networks. It lies in the hands of the individuals and institutions deploying them.
And on a personal level, the essay's final reassurance is that you do not need universal consensus to explore a new medium. You just need clarity about your own intentions.
You don't need the internet's permission to be curious. It's such a grounding, rational framework for looking at a moment in history that feels incredibly chaotic. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Something to think about.
It builds on everything we've just unpacked about visible labor and our need to see the struggle in art. If human meaning always adapts to our tools, and the physical, manual friction of creation is increasingly automated away by AI, wait, let me rephrase that. If the manual friction is gone, what new, entirely invisible struggles will the next generation inevitably invent, just to prove to each other that their work is authentically human? Think about that. Until next time, keep exploring.